بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم وبعد. So to continue inshallah, and we were discussing the issue of al-nawafil, as-salawat al-nawafil in al-ihya أو المهذب من إحياء علوم by Hujjatul Islam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali rahmatullahi alayh. And we're going to look at the first section as he divides it into two sections inshallah. So hopefully this evening finish the first section, and the following week inshallah we'll take the second. So he says الباب السابع من النوافل أو في النوافل من الصلوات اعلم أن ما عدا الفرائض من الصلوات ينقسم إلى ثلاثة أقسام سنن ومستحبات وتطوعات. So he says, know that the prayers other than the fara'id are nawafil, and they are divided into three sections. Number one, sunan. Number two, mustahabbat. And number three, tatawwa'at. So he's going to give us the definition of each inshallah. He says, وَنَعْنِي بِالسُّنَنِ ما نقل عن رسول الله عليه الصلاة والسلام المواظبة عليه كالرواتب عقب الصلوات وصلاة الضحى والوتر والتهجد وغيرها. So that which is meant by as-sunan, he says that which has reached us from the Prophet ﷺ, i.e. has been reported via the sunan, the ahadith collected by the a'imma of hadith, and they do not necessarily need to be authentic as we say today, i.e. authentic ahadith. Yes, authentic, but not authentic meaning Bukhari and Muslim alone, or that which the contemporary scholars have classified as authentic. No, if the ulama of the past, the a'imma of the past, considered them to be suitable for acting upon, then we consider them to be suitable for acting upon. So that which has been taken by the ulama to fall into that category is what he means here. And of course it's not a lesson on hadith, etc., but the categorization, sometimes there's a misunderstanding. So he says such as the rawatib aqib as-salawat, so the rawatib prayers, which he's going to come to inshallah, wa salat al-duha, he's going to come to likewise, witr, tahajjud, and other than those mentioned. He says وَنَعْنِي بِالْمُسْتَحَبَّاتِ مَا وَرَدَ الْخَبْرُ بِفَضْلِهِ وَلَمْ يُنْقَلْ الْمُوَاظَبَةُ عَلَيْهِ كَالصَّلَاةِ عِنْدَ الْخُرُوجِ مِنَ الْمَنْزِلِ وَالدُّخُولِ فِيهِ. So he says that which we mean when we say al-mustahabbat, that which has come to us through akhbar, i.e. al-khabar an al-Nabi alayhi salam, in that which has come to us of virtue, i.e. there's a prayer that is considered to be virtuous, or there is an act which is considered to be virtuous, highlighted by the Prophet alayhi salam, and here of course an act being the salah. But we have not found that the Prophet alayhi salam used to carry out this type of prayer consistently or continuously. So the difference between the sunnah and that which is considered to be mustahab is the muwadhabah. So the Prophet ﷺ carrying out this act consistently. And again, we have to add the disclaimer here that when Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah is talking about issues of fiqh, he's talking from the Shafi'i framework. And so you might find some differences in the usul of these issues when it comes to the Hanafi school, when it comes to the Hanbali school, when it comes to the Maliki school. So he says, وَنَعْنِ بِالتَّطَوُّعَاتِ مَا وَرَاءَ ذَلِكَ مِمَّا لَمْ يَرِدْ فِي عَيْنِهِ أَثَرٌ ولكنه تطوع به العبد من حيث رغب في مناجاة الله عز وجل بالصلاة التي ورد الشرع بفضلها مطلقا. And this is a very important point that he highlights here. He says that which we mean when we say at-tatawwu' is that which does not fall into the first category, i.e. the sunan, that the Prophet ﷺ highlighted these prayers or specified virtue for them, and he used to perform them consistently. Nor does it fall into the second category, which is the Prophet ﷺ perhaps highlighted virtue attached to these prayers, but the Prophet ﷺ didn't perform these prayers consistently. So the first category he did, the second he didn't. If we have a salah that is performed and it doesn't fall into these first two categories, then it can be considered tatawwu'. And then he says or sorry, we can scrap that, because he says that which we have not received an athar about. So that which we have not seen any ahadith or text in relation to, which is basically a general prayer. He says it's that which a person volunteers, i.e. they pray voluntarily and they want to call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, i.e. they want to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through that prayer. But he says, وَرَدَ الشَّرْعُ بِفَضْلِهَا مُطْلَقًا, that the virtue of this particular prayer, the virtue of it is found in the Sharia, generally speaking, in the text which refer to the virtue of the prayer. And so, why is this point important? Because this point also relates to the issue of that which is considered to be bid'ah and that which is not considered to be bid'ah. And there is a difference of opinion on what a bid'ah is. And we've spoken about this previously. A bid'ah, is it an act which is invented within the framework of Islam that was not present during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, or is it something else? And so you have contemporary scholars and students of knowledge who will take the opinion that a bid'ah is any act of worship which is performed now or after the time of the Prophet ﷺ, which wasn't performed by the Prophet ﷺ, generally speaking. Any celebration and so on and so forth, anything which is ascribed to the deen, which was not ascribed to the deen during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, contemporary scholars, some will say that that's a bid'ah. You have a different opinion amongst scholars that fall into the classical framework of Islam, i.e. the Shafi'iyya, the Ahnaf, the Hanabila, the Malikiyya, which is, and that's not to say that you won't find ulama from those camps that follow the first opinion mentioned, but the opinion is, if there is an asl in the Sharia for something, then something else can be based upon that asl. Something else can be based upon that asl, as long as there is an asl for it. And this issue here is the reason for a lot of arguments and disagreements that take place today. The issue is not whether or not something is a bid'ah, i.e. the actual thing being discussed, but the argument is, what is a bid'ah? And so sometimes you'll find two groups, they are arguing about what a bid'ah is, but they are using the things that they are arguing about instead of actually arguing about the issue underlying the conversation. An example, which was mentioned previously, the Mawlid. Is the Mawlid bid'ah? And so you'll have one camp saying it's bid'ah, one camp saying it's not bid'ah. But the question shouldn't be, is the Mawlid bid'ah? The question should be, what is a bid'ah firstly and foremostly? Because if you have two groups that disagree on what a bid'ah is, then of course they're going to argue. And that's what's happening. And then you have individuals that listen to ulama from both groups, and the individuals listening are not ulama. And so they're arguing, not knowing that they're arguing based upon two different views, underlying views. So you're arguing about a methodology, not realizing that you're arguing about a methodology, and instead assuming that you both agree on the underlying methodology, assuming that you both agree what a bid'ah is. So this issue here is an issue. It's an important point. Then he says, وَسُمِّيَتِ الْأَقْسَامُ الثَّلَاثَةُ نَوَافِلْ مِنْ حَيْثِ إِذَا نُفِلَ إِنَّ النَّفْلَ هُوَ الزِّيَادَةُ وَجُمْلَتُهَا زَائِدٌ عَلَى الْفَرَائِضِ. So he says the categories of voluntary prayers mentioned, they are referred to in Arabic as nawafil, because an-nafl in Arabic means extra. It means that which is excess. And they are in excess of the fara'id. They are extra, they are added, additional to the fara'id prayers, i.e. the 5 daily prayers that are fard upon every Muslim. Then he says, وَعْلَمْ أَنَّ النَّوَافِلَ بِاعْتِبَارِ الْإِضَافَةِ إِلَى مُتَعَلِّقَاتِهَا ثَلَاثَةُ أَقْسَامٍ. He says, know that the nawafil, in relation to that which they are ascribed to, are of 3 categories. So I said 2 in the beginning, so hopefully we'll cover 2 next week, or 1 next week and another the following week. القسم الأول ما يتكرر بتكرر الأيام والليالي وهي 8. 5 هي رواتب الصلوات الخمس وصلاة الضحى وإحياء ما بين العشاءين والتهجد. He says the first qism is that which is repeated due to the repetition of days and nights. For example, the salawat after the fara'id. So he says the rawatib. For example, salatul duha. For example, ihya'u ma bayn al-isha'ain, which is something that I believe we discussed previously. If not, we're going to discuss it this evening, inshallah. At-tahajjud, so the night prayer. So now he's going to go into each one. He says, الأولى راتبة الصبح وهي ركعتين قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ركعة الفجر خير من الدنيا وما فيها. What he says, والسنة أداؤهما قبل الفرض فإن دخل المسجد وقد قامت الصلاة فليشتغل بالمكتوبة ثم إذا فرغ قام إليهما وصلاهما. So he says the first of the rawatib salawat, as I'm sure everyone knows, is the ratibatul subh or ratibatul fajr. So the prayer which is prayed before fajr, i.e. the sunnah prayer before fajr. And he says this is two rak'at to be prayed, as the Prophet ﷺ he mentioned, rak'at al-fajr khayrun min ad-dunya wa ma fiha. The Prophet ﷺ, he said 2 rak'at of fajr are better than the entire dunya and everything in it. So think about this. You have someone who spends their entire life working a 9-to-5 job to pay off a mortgage for a house, and then they pass away. They don't own the house. And you have someone who wakes up, prays 2 rak'at before fajr, and due to that salah, he has the dunya and everything in it, better than the dunya and everything in it, i.e. of reward in the akhirah. Does it mean though praying the rak'at al-fajr consistently? That's a question that can be posed. Does it mean consistently? Is praying it once enough? I.e. I pray my fara'id and I pray that, and so I get the reward of that. And so we can hope, as there are other ahadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned the one who only does the fara'id and stays away from the haram will enter Jannah. And so perhaps just praying this once is enough for the reward. Allah knows best. But the point is the importance of the 2 rak'at prayed before fajr and praying them consistently, and thinking about, as was mentioned earlier in the khutbah, time as being worship, not money. Every moment that I don't spend in worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a moment wasted, a moment that I am going to regret on Yawm al-Qiyamah. That's a reality, it's a fact. Add a qaf into the fact. That's a reality. So on Yawm al-Qiyamah, I'm going to be regretful over the moments that I did not worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in. Therefore, I should try my best at least to utilize the moments that I should be worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in, i.e. the moments which are fard and wajib upon me, at the very least, and make that the building point, the starting point. He says, وَالسُّنَّةُ أَدَاؤُهُمَا قَبْلَ الْفَرْض. So it's sunnah to pray them before the fard. فإن دخل المسجد وقد قامت الصلاة فليشتغل بالمكتوبة. If someone enters into the masjid and the fard salah has started, i.e. fajr, then he should busy himself or herself with the fajr salah. Then he says ثم إذا فرغ قام إليهما وصلاهما. Once finishing the fajr, he then goes and prays the rak'ata al-fajr if he was unable to do so prior to fajr. And of course this is according to the Shafi'i school, and you'll find there are other opinions in relation to this issue, which we're not going to discuss now as it's not the purpose. Then he says وَالْمُسْتَحَبُّ أَن يُصَلِّيَهَا فِي الْمَنْزِلِ ثم يدخل المسجد ويصلي ركعتين تحية المسجد ثم يجلس ولا يصلي إلا أن يصلي المكتوبة. He says it's recommended though that a person prays these 2, i.e. the 2 rak'at in discussion, in his or her house. Now, in our time today, that might be difficult. Why? If you live 15 minutes away from the masjid and you say, okay, I'm gonna pray these or this salah in my house, and then I'm going to go to the masjid. Why? For the sunnah. By the time you get to the masjid, the fajr salah, you may miss it. And so you're missing a fard for the sunnah. And so it's better to come to the masjid, pray the 2 rak'at before fajr, and then pray fajr. Although, if you are able to pray in your house and come to the masjid, then you can do so, inshallah. And for example, if the masjid delays fajr prayer, as we do here and in other masajid, you have plenty of time, nearly an hour sometimes, between the start of fajr and the time that the jama'ah is prayed. Then he says, ثم يجلس ولا يصلي إلا أن يصلي المكتوبة. After having completed the 2 rak'at, it is recommended that a person does not pray anything else, i.e. he should sit and wait for the fajr salah. He says الثانية راتبة الظهر وهي 6 ركعات ركعتان بعدها وهي سنة مؤكدة وأربع قبلها وهي أيضا سنة وإن كانت دون الركعتين الأخيرتين. So he says the second of the rawatib is راتبة الظهر. So the rawatib that relate to dhuhr, which are, he says, the first being sunnah mu'akkada, so 2 rak'at, although he brings the first being the last. So 2 rak'at after dhuhr, and he says that these are sunnah mu'akkada and 4 before dhuhr. So ideally a person should be praying that to the best of their ability. Then الثالثة راتبة العصر وهي 4 ركعات قبل العصر. So this is one that we don't normally discuss, but 4 rak'at before Asr. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, may Allah have mercy upon the one who prays 4 rak'at before Asr. And so I would suggest that this one is not taken in this conversation, i.e. the sunnah of Asr should be a secondary goal, not a primary goal. The primary goal should be the rawatib, salawat, i.e. 2 before Fajr, 4 before Dhuhr, 2 after Dhuhr, and then he's going to mention Ratibatul Maghrib, so 2 rak'ahs after Maghrib, Ratibatul Isha, so 4 rak'at بعد الفريدة, and in an opinion 2 rak'at, so 2 rak'ah after Isha. So for us, when we build ourselves, we want to build ourselves with a consistency and in a way which is reasonable and realistic. So if I am not praying the rawatib, salawat, it does not make sense to start with all of these. So what should I do? Start with 2 before Fajr, 4 before Dhuhr, 2 after Dhuhr, 2 after Maghrib, 2 after Isha. If I am doing those consistently, then I add the 4 before Asr. And then I add the extra 2 after Isha. Then he says, السادسة الوتر قال أنس بن مالك كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يوتر بعد العشاء ب3 ركعات يقرأ في الأولى سبح اسم ربك الأعلى وفي الثانية قل يا أيها الكافرون وفي الثالثة قل هو الله أحد. So the last of the rawatib, according to Imam al-Ghazali, because the Ahnaf differ here with the Shafi'iyya, the Ahnaf say that the witr prayer is wajib. It's wajib, i.e. if you leave it off, you're sinning for leaving it off. The Hanabila, they say it's sunnah mu'akkada, and the person who leaves it off consistently is sinning. And likewise, assuming in the Shafi'i school also. So the witr, he says it is to be prayed after the 2 rak'at prayed after Isha, or after the 4 rak'at prayed after Isha. And he mentions here that Anas ibn Malik, he mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ used to pray after Isha 3 rak'at. And then he says, وَيُجُوزُ الْوِتْرُ مَفْصُولًا وَمَوْصُولًا بِتَسْلِيمَةٍ وَاحِدَةٍ. It's permissible to pray witr all together, i.e. 3 rak'at together, or 2 and then 1. وقد أوتر رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بركعة و3 و5 وهكذا بالأوتار إلى 11 ركعة والرواية مترددة في 13. So he says that it's permissible for a person to pray 1 rak'ah of witr, or 3 rak'at, or 5 rak'at, all the way up to 11, as this has been mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ did all of these. And then he says, and there is a difference of opinion whether or not it's the Prophet ﷺ prayed 13 rak'at, i.e. that which is extra to 11. So this issue also causes confusion with the issue of Taraweeh, which perhaps we'll discuss later on inshallah, as he's going to mention Taraweeh specifically. But sometimes the evidences for tahajjud are misused, and they are applied to Taraweeh. And there is a difference between Taraweeh and tahajjud. And you will hear people say the Prophet ﷺ only used to pray 11 rak'at, tahajjud. That's not Taraweeh. If that was the case, then Umar ibn al-Khattab would not have gathered the Sahaba to pray more than 11. And so this issue, it highlights the issue that we have when it comes to fiqh in our time today. He says, السابعة صلاة الضحى فالمواظبة عليها من عزائم الأفعال وفواضلها أما عدد ركعاتها فأكثر ما نقل فيه 8 ركعات. He says الضحى, likewise, it's from the actions that should be paid attention to. What is duha? Duha is the prayer that is prayed in between Fajr and Dhuhr, up until the the time wherein it's impermissible for a person to pray a salah, which is roughly maybe 15 minutes or so before dhuhr, where the sun is bang in the middle of the sky until the sun moves slightly. It's impermissible to pray any salah during that time. And so duha is up until about that time, basically. From the sunrise, about 10 to 11 to 12 minutes after sunrise, all the way until that particular time, a person can pray duha. And duha, it's something which you should try if you can to be consistent with. Why? Because you have what, 5 to 6 hours between the end of Fajr and Dhuhr, depending on where you are, depending on the time, i.e. winter, summer, etc. And so that's a long time without a salah. And so it's good practice to add a salah there, if possible. It doesn't have to be something difficult, make it short. He says that a person can pray witr. He says, فَأَكْثَرُ مَا نُقِلَ فِيهِ ثَمَانُ رَكَعَاتٍ, that would, the most which has been narrated in relation to the Prophet ﷺ is 8 rak'at. 8 rak'at for duha. The issue of should you add or not, the asl is there. And so if you add, if you want to pray 10, if you want to pray 12, it's all nawafil, voluntary prayers. So you can do so, inshallah. He says, وَوَقْتُهَا إِذَا أَشْرَقَتِ الشَّمْسُ وَارْتَفَعَتْ وَكَانَتْ فِي رُبْعِ السَّمَاءِ. So as we mentioned, the time. He says, الثامنة إحياء ما بين العشاءين. So the eighth from the that which is highly recommended, i.e. the rawatib, not from the rawatib, sorry, from the sunan, is to pray the time between Maghrib and Isha. So the time between Maghrib and Isha, to try to occupy that time with salah. إحياء ما بين العشاءين. And this is a practice that you will find if you go to al-Haramayn. The next time you go to perform Umrah, you will find people, if you just take notice and observe, you will find people when they pray Maghrib and they pray the Sunnah, they start to pray raka'atayn, raka'atayn, raka'atayn until the adhan of Isha. And this is a practice that those who don't know this practice, those that haven't read about this practice, might assume it's bid'ah, unfortunately. I've heard students of knowledge say, look at these people, they're performing bid'ah. It's not bid'ah. The bid'ah is your understanding, because you haven't read and you haven't asked. And there are, in fact, books authored on this issue. I believe al-Ajurri, he has a book, it's Fadlu Qiyam al-Layl, and he has a section on Ihya'u ma bayna al-Isha'ain. And so this is a practice which goes back to the Sahaba, according to al-Ajurri. If I'm not mistaken, I believe it's Imam al-Ajurri, he mentions it. And so it goes back to the Sahaba. There are, if it's either Ibn Abbas or maybe Ibn Mas'ud, I forget now. But it's a practice. And another issue is if you find that a practice has become a communal practice, i.e. you see an entire community practicing something, a particular type of salah, etc. When I say community, I don't mean a small group, I don't mean a small party, I mean, for example, a nation, a community from within the communities of Islam practicing something. Prior to assuming this is bid'ah, you should ask, where did they get it from? Because we have something which is similar to Amalu Ahl al-Medina, inherited actions. Inherited actions. The deen has been preserved for us through culture and through communal practices. So if you were to go to some of the elders and ask them about certain things, they won't tell you the evidences. They can't tell you the evidences. Where did they get it from? They got it from their mothers and their fathers, from their mothers and fathers, from their mothers and fathers. And so there are actions sometimes which are inherited. They are inherited actions. We take them from the generation that came before us, etc. And if you go back, if you look at these types of actions and you go back to the framework of Islam, many times you'll find that there is an asl there, that there is an evidence for these practices and these actions. And unfortunately, those who begin to study Islam, and they have a lot of zeal, they have a lot of passion, perhaps they have a lot of sincerity, they haven't come across these things yet. And so they are quick to assume and quick to label these things as innovation. And that's not the correct approach. The correct approach should be, I haven't come across this. Is there an asl for this practice? And then I should research. I should ask those who have more knowledge, the senior students of knowledge, the ulama, etc. And I should also go outside of my particular box of thinking, because sometimes, let's say, for example, I follow a certain school. Perhaps according to my school, it's not a practice which is considered to be a sunnah, but according to another school, it may be considered to be a sunnah. And so if it's a sunnah with another school, it's very difficult to say it's a bid'ah if it's something which has been practiced by a large amount of Muslims generation after generation, etc. And there's a very good book which speaks about the issue of thaqafa, preserving the deen through thaqafa, culture, because culture is a very big word. Thaqafa is a very big word. You have so many different types, so many layers to culture. And it's a book, it's called Risalatun fi at-tariqi ila thaqafatina by a Sheikh Mahmoud Shakir, rahimahullah. I would highly recommend it for those that can speak Arabic. It's a treatise in the path towards our thaqafa, our culture. And he speaks about the academic culture in that book, and how those who wanted to destroy Islam, they destroyed Islam by destroying, not by destroying, but by changing the pen that we use. So rather than using the pen that has worked for us generation after generation, we tried to use someone else's pen. And we failed, basically. And you see this in our systems of education today. We have a methodology of approach to learning that has worked centuries, generation after generation, has produced ulama and so on and so forth. And as the saying goes, why fix something that wasn't broken in the first place? And we tried to fix it for reasons, or someone came in and tried to fix it for us, etc. So that's the last of the first section, the al-qism al-awwal. So we'll stop there, inshallah.